Welcome everyone. It's been a busy day today, but I'm finally glad that the time has arrived for Shaila's talk. I have been personally looking forward to this specific talk for, I think, the past month, because personally, Shaila is one of my heroes. Shaila might be a bit embarrassed to, I might be making Shaila a bit embarrassed. I'm sorry, Shaila, a bit embarrassed, but when I moved to Park and I was meditating in Park, I just did not understand what all these monks were talking about jhana. And it is actually after a recommendation from another fellow monk that I read Shaila's book, Wisdom Wide and Deep, which gave me such a clear understanding of what jhana is. And I must say, it quite boosted my practice. So whilst I say thank you to Shaila, I am very happy to introduce Shaila and to have Shaila with us today, presenting a talk for the Dhamma Center concerning strengthening concentration through jhana. Now, Shaila, to those of you who are not aware about Shaila and who she is, Shaila is the founder of Bodhi Courses and the Insight Meditation South Bay, based in Silicon Valley, California. She has authored several books, one of which is Focused and Fearless, and Wisdom Wide and Deep, a practical handbook for mastery of jhana and vipassana, which she authored after studying and sort of practicing under the Venerable Pauk Sayadaw, whilst Venerable Pauk Sayadaw was residing in America. And these books, I must say, and I hope that Shaila will give us an introduction to these books and what these contents are for everyone's benefit, are fantastic books. So without much ado, I'm handing over the floor to Shaila. And if anyone has any questions that they would like to have answered, you have the opportunity to ask these questions during our question and answer time. We are also going to have a short meditation session and a meditation session as well. And Shaila is also going to be telling you about her upcoming retreats, which you have the opportunity of joining, especially our viewers who are joining us from America and from all around the world. So thank you very much, and over to you, Shaila.
Thank you. What a beautiful introduction. So I'm going to speak primarily about concentration and share a little bit about the importance of concentration, positioning it as right concentration, and look at the jhana practices a little bit, like a basic introduction, and then we can explore more further and in more detail in the questions and answers. In the two books that Bhante referred to, I have spoken quite a bit about the development of concentration and jhana. I usually recommend Focused and Fearless as one to read first, because it deals a little bit more with the approach to concentration and jhana, the developing of the conditions for it, and has a lot of exercises for daily life practice. And as Bhante said, my Wisdom Wide and Deep book really goes through the systematic training that I went through with Venerable Pauk Sayadaw, and was intended to make that systematic training of both samadhi and all the different jhana practices and the specific insight practices more clearly understood and more easily available to contemporary practitioners. So today's topic really is a fairly basic introduction to concentration, and as I said, I'm happy to entertain more specific questions as we go along. The term samadhi that we find in the Pali tradition is a powerful term that describes a kind of unification of the mind. It's the basis for wisdom. as it says in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha said, develop concentration. One who is concentrated understands things as they really are. Concentration is the ground out of which wisdom arises, because when we can have a steady mind, a concentrated mind, we're able to see the object or what we're experiencing far more deeply and more clearly. And then we're able to perceive the subtle layers that are occurring in our cognitive experience. So our mindfulness is heightened. If our mind doesn't settle and we try to do insight practice with a distracted mind, what is it that we're going to have insight into? Very likely, we'll only be having insight into the ways that we're commonly distracted. So we need a certain degree of steadiness in order to sustain the quality of mindfulness that will allow us to penetrate the experience so that our perception can be liberating. We need to be able to see how and when those subtle formations of delusion, of I-making and mind-making occur. How does clinging happen? The term samadhi, I usually translate as simply concentration. It's one of the more common translations in English. But the Pali texts describe this quality of concentration as being internally steadied, composed and settled, unified, and concentrated. So we're not looking at a forced, narrow view of something, like concentrating really hard on something. But we're looking at a unification of the mind with the object, a stillness of mind that is free from distracted, an undistractedness, collectedness, and focused attention that produces a profound stability of mind. Concentration is said to be the factor that lands on the meditation object, penetrates it, and can stay there. So it's not wobbling, it's not falling off, it's not distracted by other things. What we give our attention to, we are able to stay attentive with. So the characteristic of the concentrated mind is a mind that is not dispersed. It's not dissipated, not scattered, and not agitated. And so we often experience it with a sense of cohesion or coherence, a kind of internal strength of mind. And it's often very pleasant. These states are linked to bliss or happiness or possibly deep equanimity. Initially, they give rise to great joy. It's called a joy that is born of seclusion. And these states are associated with, the concentrated experience is associated with tranquility and calmness, with the feeling of ease and peacefulness, stillness, rapture, bliss, deep and profound equanimity. It sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So I want to look at two kinds of samadhi, two kinds of concentration. And there actually are multiple kinds, but I thought we'd start with simply the two primary sets that I like to look at to distinguish the kind of practice that we are developing. The first is when we use a single object or a fixed focus. It's sometimes called fixed samadhi, apana samadhi. And this is the kind of practice that we would undertake to lead to the absorption states of jhana, where there is a single focus. And this, the Theravada tradition offers us many different objects that we can use to develop apana samadhi, to focus our attention on a specific quality or element or factor or meditation object. Some of them lead to absorption states of jhana, and some of them don't. And different ones go through all four jhanas, and some only up to the third jhana, and some only up to the first. So the range or the way that one can develop these different objects in terms of jhana varies based upon the object, but I've enjoyed the access to a range of approaches. It isn't that there's only one object that you can use to focus your mind. The Theravada Buddhist tradition lists 40 different objects that include working with the breath, working with colors or elements, the reflections on the body parts or the repulsiveness of the body parts, the Brahma Viharas like loving kindness, compassion, etc., the contemplation of the corpses, and certain reflective practices that bring a lot of joy and delight to the mind, like focusing on the inspiring qualities of the Buddha or the Dhamma or the Sangha, our virtues or generosity. So that's one type of samadhi I wanted to mention, the apana samadhi, the one with the fixed focus. In contrast, there's another kind that's called khanika samadhi, or momentary concentration. And this develops out of a continuity of our observation of the arising and passing of mental and physical phenomena. So we are concentrated. So it's a moment-to-moment concentration with whatever we're perceiving of body and mind experience. So it's a steadiness, and all the jhana factors can be present of directing attention, sustaining attention, joy, happiness, and the one-pointedness of mind, tremendous bliss and equanimity, and all the wholesome qualities we associate with concentration can develop. But the object continues to change. So there's that steadiness, but the steadiness is in the midst of changing experiences rather than that fixed focus. Whether one is developing mindfulness and concentration with a fixed focus or with the momentary concentration that comes through allowing our perceptions to change, either way, the samadhi describes a mind that is unentangled, that is released from the distractions of the hindrances, from the restless agitation of thinking, from the complexities of the discursive mind. It's utterly free from the hindrances. So we can develop one-pointedness, and some ways of developing one-pointedness enable the four jhanas to arise, or we can develop a concentration with changing objects, as we do in insight practice, as we do when we observe the changing nature of the five aggregates of body and mind. Samadhi in the Buddhist tradition is taught as a component of the Eightfold Path. It is sama-samadhi, right concentration. We also find it included in many other Buddhist lists. It's one of the 10 paramis. It's one of the 7 factors of awakening. We find it in the list of the 5 powers and the 5 spiritual faculties. Most commonly, when we find right samadhi described, it is actually defined as the 4 specific states of absorption called the 4 jhanas. And so this is a fairly common repetitive description of these 4 states that are marked by profound bliss, happiness, and equanimity. They intensify the wholesome states of mind, and they produce an absorptive experience that is apart from sensual pleasures. So the Buddha encouraged the cultivation of this refined meditative bliss of jhana and described it as being a great support for the path of awakening. I'd like to read from the Middle Length Discourses on the exposition of the truths, just to give you a description of one of the most common ways that we find jhanas described. And what, friends, is right concentration? Here, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, one enters and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. With the stilling of applied and sustained thought, one enters and abides in the second jhana, which has self-confidence and singleness of mind without applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of concentration. With the fading away as well of rapture, one abides in equanimity and mindful and fully aware, feeling pleasure with the body. One enters and abides in the third jhana, on account of which noble ones announce, he is one who has a pleasant abiding, who has equanimity and is mindful. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, one enters and abides in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. This is called right concentration. So clearly, concentration is not merely a preliminary exercise that precedes mindfulness. It's not just developing a little bit of focus that helps us, feel better. But samadhi arises out of a continuity of mindfulness and develops the factors and skills that make it possible not only to sustain a samadhi state and experience the rejuvenating and powerful and conditions of absorption, but it makes the mind conducive to liberating insight. Concentration is probably not unfamiliar to you. You've no doubt learned how to concentrate to perform all sorts of daily tasks. You might engage quite a bit of concentration in school, in your profession, in some of your hobbies. Very often when we're interested in something, we are focused on it. We are steady, we are attentive. To complete a task all the way to the end and not procrastinate, to stay steady, we need some degree of concentration. And when one comes to a beginning meditation practice, very often, even if the practice is just a basic mindfulness or satipatthana practice and not oriented towards jhana, the first instruction is very often to gather the mind, to collect the mind, to settle the mind, maybe on the breath, maybe on the body, maybe on some simple object, maybe on a phrase or a word like Buddha, Buddha. When we first recognize how distracted we are, how out of control our minds seem to be, how they go into patterns that cause anxiousness or restlessness, concentration seems very attractive. And in fact, I've written my third book, which is going to be called probably Beyond Distraction. I've just submitted it to Wisdom Publications. So we're looking at a publication date in 2022. So look out for that book eventually. But I'm excited about it because although I wrote my first two books really about the deep states of absorption and the insight practices that occur out of that, I wanted to focus this book on the primary obstructions that prevent people from actually getting into the first jhana. And often that is the restless mind, the habitual patterns of thought that keep us attached to distraction and rumination and worry and fear and planning and all the obsessive thoughts. So there's a whole book coming out in the next, I guess, year and a half from now, very likely, that you can enjoy. Sometimes when we do undertake a concentration practice, we have to sometimes look at our motive. What do we want to get out of it? Why are we dedicating ourselves to observing a particular object? Sometimes you sit down to meditate and perhaps you might use the breath as an object. It's a very common meditation subject. So you sit down to observe the breath. Well, from one perspective, it seems like a pretty weird thing to do. Like, why do you need to focus on the breath? What's the big deal? And why would you limit your attention to the breath? As we choose to narrow the focus to a fixed object for periods of time in our meditation practice, it's helpful to contemplate the reasons why we would do so, because we don't do so just to experience the kind of pleasant states associated with concentration. We develop right concentration not because we want a temporary pleasure of rapture and joy or equanimity, because we know that's not the aim of the path. It's not the goal of our practice, and it's not the purpose of the spiritual journey. But there's great value that comes by cultivating the skills to steady the mind. And the states of jhana produce conditions of mind that are remarkably fit, healthy, able to do the work of insight practice. But there are sometimes a few issues that come up. And one is that sometimes people start to get concentrated and they get excited. Oh boy, it's finally working. Something's finally happening. I am succeeding. And they can identify with the pleasure, the joy, the bliss that comes with a steady mind, and mistakenly look to the experiences, the feelings that are associated with concentration as the signposts of a successful meditation, and to declare, I got concentrated. And that's simply looking in the wrong direction to assess our practice. In fact, the very activity of judging our sitting, whether we're judging it favorably or unfavorably, can lead us down the wrong path. It can build up a false sense of success and an attachment to an identification with as the meditator as soon as we're able to observe, say, 94 breaths in a row without distraction. And that's just not the purpose of our practice. There are many beautiful things that happen in the course of our practice. And whether we're developing mindfulness, concentration, or doing vipassana practices, we can look at the list of the 10 corruptions of insight that include experiences like rapture, luminosity, happiness, pleasure, tranquility, equanimity. And these can be called corruptions of insight not because they're unwholesome. They're beautiful experiences that come along with meditation, but because we can become attached to them. So we have to keep a watch out for the potential for attachment. Without the attachment, these are not corruptions. We can abide with the rapture, the happiness, the tranquility, the bliss, the equanimity, the luminosity without any problem. And so we can consider what are the real signposts of success in our practice. If it's not, oh, there's luminosity, oh, there's rapture. I think we look for the ending of the hindrances, the ending of the defilements, and in particular, the ending of craving and clinging. The aim of this practice is liberation, the end of suffering, the end of the craving that is the cause of suffering. And when we remember the aim, we're not going to stop short with a little bit of momentary pleasure or a few, experiences of rapture, tranquility, or bliss. The Buddha encouraged people to experience the joys of seclusion, the joys of concentration, and specifically to not fear these states, to cultivate them. We develop concentration because it is beneficial. We learn then to use the concentrated mind to support our liberating practice, not to abide just enjoying and attached to a temporary concentration state. Just as any pleasant activity can lead to some degree of attachment to those experiences, the blissful meditative states of concentration can appear to be an object for attachment. And these states are undeniably attractive. But honestly, I'm not very worried about the attachment to concentrated states, primarily because if we have a genuine experience of concentration, to have that experience, the mind must have withdrawn from the hindrances. So the hindrances aren't arising, including sensual desire. So it only takes a bit of right view to clarify this practice. So although I sometimes hear people turning away from even trying a jhana practice for fear of this attachment, honestly, I don't worry about it at all. We simply teach concentration and practice concentration in the context of the Eightfold Path, supported by right view, understanding its purpose and its relationship to insight. We just don't develop concentration in order to feel concentrated, but we understand the role that concentration, deep samadhi, and the absorption states of jhana have on the liberating path. I want to mention a few kind of common distortions or misunderstandings that occur around concentration practice. The first is that it's sometimes simply a little out of balance with the other 6 awakening factors. So if you recall the 7 factors of awakening, they include mindfulness, energy, investigation of states, joy, bliss, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And we need all of these qualities developing, these factors of awakening. But sometimes the energy and the concentration get a little bit out of balance. And it's not uncommon, particularly when we get strongly concentrated, if the factors of awakening are not balanced, it's not uncommon to be really concentrated and then all of a sudden, plunk, we feel slothful, dull, and fall asleep. Because the other factors of awakening weren't supporting that concentration. So in the development of concentration, we have to watch these factors and in particular, bring in the support of the energy factor and perhaps the joy factor as well. It's true we give a little less attention in the jhana approach to investigation because we don't want that kind of movement of investigating. But the joy and the joy factor and the energy factor really need to support the continued deepening of concentration. But if there's too little concentration, we'll be easily distracted. We'll go off into restlessness, or we won't be able to stay focused on the experience that we're having, or we might get lost in the various distractions. So this balance of the awakening factors is a really important one. But how do we know then if we have developed enough concentration, not enough concentration, or perhaps too much concentration? Is that possible, to have too much concentration? Well, actually, it is quite possible. Not that there's a set amount of concentration, but it's measured in terms of balance. If our concentration gets too strong in comparison to the amount of energy that we have, then it's too much concentration for that amount of energy. And a wise practitioner will not keep deepening the concentration until they can bring up the energy to sustain it. If the mind starts to feel dull, if our ability to direct attention feels sluggish, if the mind feels too still or sleepy, inert, or is losing interest, then the concentration is out of balance. And too often people then just try to force the concentration, when I think a more skillful approach is to bring the other awakening factors up to support the kind of the level of concentration that we have. An appropriate balance creates conditions that are conducive to deep calm and can lead to the absorption states of jhana, where the mind goes into a secluded, refined, relaxed, absorbed state. And develops a profound flexibility, malleability. It's not a blank state. It's not a trance state. We are mindful, alert, every moment. The energy is there, but the object remains steady. So we're not going to the sensory experiences of hearing and smelling and sensations in the body or different thoughts. We're absorbed with the meditation object, but the mindfulness is heightened. Another perhaps misuse of concentration might be if somebody tries to force the concentration in order to deny something that is difficult, or not, or just favor what is pleasant. And this could be problematic if the ability to direct the mind is habitually used to avoid maybe painful emotional states or difficult situations. And then we don't give ourselves the chance to learn, to grow, to contemplate, to reflect, to really know what's happening in our hearts and minds. And we can notice when that happens, I think. I think we can reflect upon our motivation, and we can get a sense of what the effect is as we concentrate our mind. If we're using concentration to avoid pain or emotional difficulties, then aversion is intact. And it will bring a sense of hardness, of separation, a sense of restrictiveness, which is quite different than the ability to let go into an absorption state in which the mind is at ease and spacious. Then there's a sense of softening, a sense of openness. I don't see this happening very much because we really have to work with the hindrances, including aversion, initially, just to attain any state of samadhi. But I do think it is worth keeping in mind that it's possible to learn to turn the mind away in a way that might not always be skillful. And so this has to be a wise choice to seclude the mind in absorption. There are practices also that focus on a single object, such as a mantra or a sound or an image. And they develop the concentration aspect very strongly, but may not have a method for cultivating investigation and insight. So I've had people come to my retreats who were easily concentrated. Because they had done practices that focused on concentration before, they could sit down and settle very deeply into these absorption states. But it was clear that they had no insight about the qualities of the mind. They had just learned certain concentration patterns and had practiced them for decades. So even if they come to a jhana retreat, I teach them insight practice. I teach them to be mindful of the body, mindful of the senses, mindful of our experience, because if we just focus on one particular object without the understanding of the insight that this leads to, then I think it's a wrong view of samadhi. And I do see that happening fairly frequently, that somebody took a meditation course 20 years ago and they never went back to the teacher, but they liked the practice and have done it every day for the last 2 decades. And they actually have the capacity and to turn their mind in a way that deepens concentration. So I do see this as another misuse of the concentration practice, not because there's anything wrong with mantra practice, but I do believe that they need to be held within an understanding of the Eightfold Path, an understanding of right concentration, an understanding that leads to insight. So if the mind is already has an aptitude for concentration, then that might be a time to strengthen the mindfulness of various objects of mind and body before going back and further strengthening concentration. Now, it's true that we do downplay the investigation factor when we are undertaking a jhana practice. We're experiencing the breath, but we observe it in a way, if we're using the breath as the object, we observe it in a way that we are not noticing the changing nature of sensations. We are not investigating the changing qualities of the mind, because we want to heighten the stability and on a fixed focus. But this ability to move the mind to the various objects, and the flexibility not only to keep the mind steady, but also to just as easily shift to changing objects, that skill is really important. So how do we know if we're developing right concentration or wrong concentration? How do we know if we are really developing the right concentration that will support a liberating path? I think one thing we can do is we can just check periodically, not all the time, but just periodically, to what extent is this affected by clinging or not affected by clinging? Is it supporting the deepest aims of our path, the aspirations that we might have for liberation? My understanding of right samadhi is that it is a practice of letting go. It is a practice of relinquishment. At every step in the training, we are cultivating the capacity to let go and let go and let go. We are unraveling any place that clinging could land. To enter into an absorption, one not only has to have abandoned the hindrances and cultivated the jhana factors, those conditions that support the ability to concentrate the mind, but we also have to be willing to let go of our fascination with sensory stimulation. That's a profound letting go. To shift from the first jhana to the second jhana, we have to let go of that quality of happiness that's born of seclusion. To shift from the second to the third, we have to be willing to let go of that rapture and pleasure that's born of concentration. To shift from the second to shift from the third to the fourth, we have to let go of that sublime contentment that is associated with mindfulness and equanimity. And to shift from the third to the fourth, we have to be willing to let go of even that subtle and blissful, pleasant feeling. Then to shift into the formless perceptions. We have to be willing to, again, let go of our perception of materiality and go through formless perceptions of space, consciousness, emptiness, and nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. Each step is another experience of letting go, of relinquishment, of renouncing. So we are, in effect, checking the mind again and again if there's any attachment. So when we check if there's any attachment and we understand the practice as a practice of relinquishment, and we know that it's then based upon right understanding, it's supported by mindfulness, and right effort, and therefore it is fully integrated in the development of the Eightfold Path. I've been teaching concentration and jhana retreats every year since about 2004, I think. And it's really fun to work with people who are getting an experience of these states and mature it. And I like to take people through them fairly slowly so that they really have access and, more importantly, have developed the skills. It's the skill development that I think these jhana practices are so brilliant for. But one of the primary problems that I see people have is that they judge their rate of development. They come into a retreat with unrealistic expectations, and they think, okay, it's a 10-day retreat and there's only 4 jhanas, I'll warm up for a day or 2, and then I should get 1 jhana a day for the next, 1 jhana every other day. And if they get to, say, the 5th day of the retreat and they're not in the first jhana, they start having feelings of failure. And that triggers kind of an emotional crisis. Well, none of that is going to support the concentration. And the problem really is that those expectations are quite unrealistic. We can't force these practices to happen on some particular timeline that we just think that are kind of like we just assume that we're entitled to it, or that we deserve it, or that there's some attachment to that idea. We have to be willing to just practice focusing the mind, concentrating the mind, developing the conditions that will support concentration, and watch that as the conditions that support concentration grow stronger and ripen, that the concentration becomes stronger and the mind becomes some point we're on the threshold of absorption. So I don't like to go for the jhana, because I think that too easily triggers this kind of identification and expectation. I like to cultivate the conditions that lead to jhana and develop the qualities and the skills and an appropriate pace so that those qualities will ripen and mature. And then we find ourselves at the threshold and can learn then the particular skills that allow us to open that door and enter into the absorption. Or not, if we prefer not to. I already mentioned that one of the problems too is that people don't always apply it to insight. And there's a common story, you may have heard it, but I like it very much, that one of my teachers used to tell about an ancient rishi who had very strong samadhi and sat down to make a cup of tea in his cave. So he built the fire and he put the water on the tea to boil. And while he was waiting for it to boil, he thought, I think I'll just enter absorption while it's boiling. So he did that. And he kind of woke up, I don't know, a week later, kind of came out of it a week later or something. And his first thought was, I want my tea. And this would be considered certainly deep samadhi to stay absorbed for 7 days, but it would be considered wrong samadhi because the craving for the tea remained intact. And it's not that the absorption will end all craving, but we practice the absorption in a context that then becomes applied to the ways in which the mind clings or doesn't cling, perpetuates craving and the causes of suffering or not. So concentration itself may not uproot craving. We need wisdom and insights to uproot that craving. But these practices have to come together, and the concentration shouldn't be practiced in isolation from a liberating path. One of the things that is so powerful about jhana practice is the way that it temporarily suspends sensual desires. And when I say temporarily, sometimes people think, oh, well, that means that it's like it's a corruption. I don't think that at all. You have a temporary, maybe for hours, maybe for days, maybe for weeks or for months, experience in which there is no attachment and craving for sensual pleasures. How can you not have insight? How can that hindrance of sensual desires, that fetter of sensual desires, not be weakened by the sustained experience of a non-sensuous bliss? The experiences of jhana reorient the habitual ways that we keep reaching for the sensory world to produce happiness. And when we have sustained experiences of happiness born of seclusion, that fetter of sensual desire will be greatly weakened. But because it's not really born of wisdom yet, but is simply born of seclusion, we also have to understand, we have to bring in the wisdom so that we can weaken that desire further and not simply try and scamper back into a jhana to free the mind again and again in that temporary way. We learn a lesson and then we allow the insight to inform how we meet every contact in life. The Buddhist path of jhana is really, I believe, a path of jhana as the basis for insight. Concentration and insight are integrated together into one path. There are specific vipassana practices, though, that can be taught after jhana has been established. And we don't do the insight practices in the state of jhana because we're not thinking. So we can't change our object and bring in new intentions. We're absorbed with the meditation object. But we emerge from the absorption with a mind that is fit for insight. And we harness the strength of the refined and steadily concentrated mind in order to do profound insight practices. And I talk a lot about these insight practices in Wisdom Wide and Deep. And that was one of the things that I found most illuminating when I practiced with Venerable Pawak Sayadaw. Because although he has a reputation for emphasizing absorption, what I learned from him primarily was not so much the absorption practice, because I was actually doing it before I met him. So he taught me I learned a lot about absorption practice from him, because I learned how he's very efficient about it. I was doing things on my own, sort of in a, maybe in this kind of not so efficient way. And he really streamlined the practice, clarified things. I learned a tremendous amount about absorption. But what was so stunning for me in his approach was the way that he applied the concentrated mind to discern the details of matter and mind, the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, how perception functioned, how the cognitive process operated, how things were known, and to develop insight practices based upon those discernments. Those discernments would be much more difficult without the strength and stability of the concentrated mind. So it was that link from the samadhi to the insight that I found so incredibly profound. As we develop our practice, it's really important that when things sound, ooh, that's exciting, ooh, that's profound, ooh, I want that we let go of the tendency to judge our practice or compare the rate of our progress with others. Some people are easily concentrated. They take to this practice like a duck to water. And other people really, really struggle and find it challenging. But nevertheless, I think it is very much worth the effort. We don't know how insight will arise. All we can do is cultivate the conditions. That's what we can do. And as long as we're alive and have time and energy and interest, let's use this time to cultivate the conditions. Now, there's a poem I want to share with you that is from Patachara's enlightenment poem. She was one of the early Buddhist nuns, and her enlightenment poem describes a bit of her practice, that she concentrated the mind, and then some time later, after she went back into her room or whatever, the awakening experience happened. And I really like this experience because it describes the conditions that we develop so that we are available for the possibility of awakening. And her background story I won't go into, but she experienced tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. Her entire family, husband and children, were each killed in a very short period of time, each in just traumatic and tragic ways. So she actually met the Buddha almost having gone crazy. And it was the Buddha who encouraged her to recover her presence of mind. And then she ordained. And her poem says, when they plow their fields and sow seeds in the earth, when they care for their wives and children, young Brahmins find riches. But I've done everything right and followed the rule of my teacher. I'm not lazy or proud. Why haven't I found peace? Bathing my feet, I watched the bath water spill down the slope. I concentrated my mind the way you train a good horse. Then I took a lamp and went into my cell, checked the bed, and sat down on it. I took a needle and pushed down the wick. When the lamp went out, my mind was freed. Meditation practice is not a mere technology that we can apply to produce a predictable result on a predictable schedule, such as it's the fourth day of a retreat and I should be in the fourth jhana by now. We can use the methods of meditation to create the conditions in our lives and in our practice of harmony and ethical conduct that supports calmness and a mind free from remorse. We can develop the skills to allow us to focus our attention, to develop calmness and clarity, to choose objects that are suitable to our aim to focus on. We can unravel the hindrances and free our minds from the defilements. We can basically create the conditions for liberating insight. We can create the conditions that will allow the perception that we already have, we know things change, to be a liberating perception, to be a liberating knowledge. But we can't force or control how insight will arise. But we can cultivate samadhi. And to some degree, protected conditions are very helpful. A retreat condition is really designed as a conditions for deepening samadhi, because we've withdrawn from the worldly activities. We've set a lot aside, so we've already let go of a lot, and we're in a relatively quiet environment. During this pandemic, many of us are probably meditating in much more at home with family or neighbors or whatever the sounds in your streets are, and it may not seem as peaceful and supportive as a retreat center. And I think this is, for most people, actually fairly true. Not for everybody, we're all in different situations. But we can use whatever conditions there are to support this capacity to free the mind from the hindrances, the defilements, and to support concentration. And know that these concentration states, though they are impermanent and will dissipate after the meditation, they are tremendously valuable, very profound. And I believe that they do this profound unification and stability of mind that comes through jhana practice, that comes through samadhi training, creates the conditions that will lead, that do lead to the realization of nibbana and the liberation of mind through not clinging. They're very much worth the time to practice them. So those were my words of reflection. Shall we go directly into a meditation?
Yes, Shaila, that would be nice.
Okay. Find a way of sitting where you're upright and relaxed. Don't hesitate to stand up or stretch for a moment if that will allow you to sit more comfortably. And then settle into the experience of just being here as you are. I'd like to guide the meditation using the breath as the primary object. But I don't recommend that we just dive in and grab a hold of the breath as soon as we sit down. First, open your attention and be aware of where you are. Feel the temperature. Are you warm or cool? Notice the sounds in the room, the sounds outside, and just allow those sounds to arise and pass away. Tuning into the experience of being just now as you are. Drop the attention into the body and feel the contact with the floor or the seat. Feel the sensations where the hands touch. You might feel where the lips touch closed or where the eyes touch closed, or any part of your body that touches the seat or the cushion, or if you're in a chair, the back of the chair. Just feel the body sitting. By dropping our attention into the present experience of sitting, we let go of thoughts of past or future, and we're mindful here and now. One of the experiences you might become aware of is that you're breathing. Experience the body breathing. Become aware of breath. Notice the breath initially, just however you happen to notice it. You might notice it in the belly. You might notice a general expansion and contraction of the torso. You might feel the touch of the nostrils. Initially, we're simply attuning our attention to the present experience of breath. Letting go of any distracting thoughts and connecting with this experience of breathing. As the attention settles upon the breath, you might bring your attention to the area of the nostrils and upper lip. to experience breath as it enters and exits the body. If there are perceptions in the torso that are related to the breath, just let those perceptions be in the background and direct your attention and sustain your attention on knowing breath just as it enters and exits the body. As you sit, observing the breath, notice how you're knowing the breath. Notice where you're knowing the breath. Where are you directing attention? Although we might initially feel the breath as contact, as sensation, as a tangible experience of pressure or movement or touching or coolness or heat at some place in the nostrils or upper lip. And it's fine to initially ground your attention with those tangible sensations. Gradually give less attention to the tangible experience. Perhaps direct your attention to an area off the nostrils. And notice breath as breath. So you may not need the support of those sensations, but can allow the attention to gather and stabilize and become steady. Just knowing breath, directing the attention to breath off the body, sustaining attention on knowing breath. Letting the sensations be in the background, and in the foreground, we're directing attention to a simple occurrence, breath. Relax into this knowing of breath. We don't need to strain, we don't need to force. We're interested in directing attention to breath. One of the traditional instructions is to observe the breath as we would observe as the gatekeeper of an ancient city would observe the gate. So just as people might enter the gate, the city gates, and depart, the gatekeeper doesn't follow the people and the merchants into the marketplace, nor does he follow the caravans out as they go to the next village. The gatekeeper's job is to stay focused on what enters and exits the city gate. Similarly, we observe the breath as it enters and exits the body. We don't need to follow it in to feel sensations in the body, nor do we need to visualize something of it going out. We simply direct our attention and sustain our focus on this area around the nostrils where breath happens. If your attention drifts off, entangled in thoughts about past and future, without berating yourself for thinking, just let go of the fascination with those thoughts and gently bring the attention back to observe the in-breath and the out-breath. If you find yourself straining or struggling, trying too hard, then relax into the knowing of breath. Nothing else you need to be concerned with. For these moments, we settle the attention and enjoy breathing in and breathing out. Keeping it simple, enjoying that simplicity. And before I end the meditation period with the ring of a bell, please just notice the quality of your mind. Restless, agitated, calm, joyful. Just notice.
Thank you, Shaila. That was a lovely session.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we go into the questions and answers, I wanted to just mention that I put in the chat box links to a few upcoming events that I have. I have two websites, basically. One is called bodhicourses.org, and that's where I offer a lot of online classes. And my next one coming up, registration is open for it. It's on the jhana factors. So if you're interested in continuing with this theme, a course is available for you. And this one is designed to participate from any time zone. I also posted a link to a course that I'm offering through Insight Meditation South Bay. That's imsb.org. And that one is a course on developing mindfulness. And it's in the evening in Pacific time. So in Asia, that would probably be your mornings, depending on exactly where you are. And many of our programs that are offered, I offer retreats, and both in-person and online retreats, and various other courses. And you can just peruse the IMSB website or the Bodhi Courses website to find those. I hope that I'll see you again. It's fun talking with you, and I'm going to look forward to the next few minutes with the questions and answers that we have.
Lovely. And also the links and descriptions of Shaila's books are available on the Dhamma Center website, as well as you can just simply Google her name. And so, Shaila, to the question. So if anyone does have any questions, you can put it down on the chat section, and I will incorporate it into the discussion. And anyone who is joining us through Facebook, you can put it on your respective chat section as well, and I will incorporate it. So I have multiple screens here that I'm looking at. Shaila, a lot of people question the possibility of jhanic practice, or even having a high focus or high concentration practice whilst leading and having a family, having a high stress job. What is your advice? How can a person mitigate this?
Yeah, I say practice anyway. And don't think it's impossible. There's no doubt that it's true that a quiet, simple existence is probably more conducive than juggling a million things in our lives. But the main hindrances are not the amount of responsibilities that we have in life, but it's the way we relate to them. Are we, it's the 5 hindrances and restlessness and agitation and the attachment to those things. It's perfectly possible to engage in an active lay life with many worldly responsibilities, work and family, and also develop the capacity to not be so entangled that we can't just set them down for a period of time when we meditate. So we learned to not only pick up our responsibilities, but also to sometimes set them down for a period of time. And the Buddha taught jhana not only to monastics, he specifically taught it to lay people. And one of the great lay disciples of the Buddha was Anathapindika. And he was a very busy man with many worldly responsibilities and lots of family concerns and issues. He was a banker, a financier, and a merchant. So he was basically a busy guy. And he had access to jhana. The Buddha simply said to practice it from time to time. So we do it periodically. And for most of the time, I feel like the if we maintain it and practice it, develop access to it, and then practice it regularly, lay people really can maintain access for quite in their daily life. It may not be quite as strong as in retreat, but it is possible. And it may be that life gets complicated at some points, or there's like emotional upheaval or just too much, and we could say lose access to it for a period of time. I don't worry about that at all, because we just need, as conditions change, then the conditions can re-arise to support the absorption states again. Remember, the main conditions is the seclusion from the hindrances. And also, I didn't talk specifically about it in this talk, but right concentration is based upon virtue. So if we maintain our precepts in daily life and we work with the hindrances, then, we might have to warm up our concentration when we re-enter a retreat, or practice a little bit more in our daily life to warm it up. But it's still available. And even if you're somebody who never experienced the absorption, then nevertheless, the skills you develop with concentration still produce wholesome states of mind. So the entrance into the absorption isn't the main reason for practicing.
You made an interesting point during your talk. The fact that while samatha or concentration-oriented meditation techniques are practiced, the underlying support for insight, or the underlying support that insight gives to that practice. And I was taken aback to my time at Park, where whilst we were practicing strong jhana, in any, on any day, or when we would struggle with ourselves, the data or the inspiration that we receive or give ourselves is through vipassana or insight. That is what we use. And I was just quickly taken aback. Oh, yeah, absolutely. In each part, Yeah. And when it comes to an attitude, what is the attitude a person, in your opinion, should have when it comes to practicing a concentration-oriented practice? What is the attitude which you think a person should have? What should be supporting that person? What should be the intention that supports his practice?
Yeah. I actually think people can have different attitudes that can, a variety of attitudes can be very supportive. Much depends upon what inspires us. But I do think it should be connected with the path. As you say, we get inspiration when we realize our goal. We don't need to compare, oh, I'm this far from the goal, and oh, I'll never get there. Oh, no. But we realize we're undertaking this for a profound purpose. Liberation, the end of all defilements, the complete eradication of greed, hate, and delusion. How can we think that might just happen because we sit down for 20 minutes a day, or we sit for an hour a day, whatever? The goal is beautiful, and I love keeping that direction in mind. Then when we realize the direction, to me, it doesn't feel far off. It feels more like a magnetic draw, that everything that we do in life, whatever kinds of practices we're doing, are still pointing in that direction. And it's not my job to figure out how far I am away or where I am on the map. My job is to keep orienting to that direction, and to at sometimes strengthen the samadhi, at other times practice the insight, sometimes develop the heart qualities of loving kindness, certainly check the ethics and the precepts, and do all the various aspects that we can cultivate on the path. So when you ask about the attitude, I find tremendous inspiration in recognizing the potential of the practice. if that doesn't do it for somebody and they think, oh gosh, I just think about the goal of enlightenment and I think that's not for me, I'll never get there, then maybe just think about something that feels inspiring to you, like having a more peaceful mind. Just a little bit more peace in life would go a long way. A little bit less anger, a little bit less greed, a little bit less attachment would just go a long way to removing a lot of the suffering that we experience. So we can have those kinds of attitudes. What I want to do is take the timeline of demand off and open it up to the potential of the profound path, and not worry where this experience right now is on the path, but just keep the inspiration going. So you could say maybe the attitude is of trust. There's faith in the unfolding of the path. Maybe the inspiration, some people find a lot of interest in inspiration in one of the powers of investigation, of wanting to know. Wanting to know what these are like. When we look at the suttas, the Buddha talked about the jhanas over and over and over and over again. I mean, you can't read any of the collections of the discourses without finding many, many references to the jhanas. There can be no doubt that he taught jhanas and that he encouraged them. It's so repeated in the suttas. So I think there was a time in my practice where my attitude was just, I want to have a sense of what he's talking about. He mentions them, so let me try them. He wouldn't mention them if they weren't going to be good for me. I have enough faith in that. So let me try them. Let me see what that is and see where it leads. So curiosity is a great attitude. Patience is a really necessary attitude so that demand isn't there. The capacity to let go, to relinquish, to renounce, to have an orientation to experience that is not grabbing on, but is just letting go and and maintaining that attention in the letting go. That's a great attitude too. There's many different attitudes that we can have. And we each will know what attitudes bring more lightness and clarity in our lives and what habitual attitudes keep causing us to lose track of what matters.
Sure. We have a couple of questions here as well. Is going in and out of sleep during meditation a sign of concentration or a break in your concentration?
Most likely it's a sign of sloth and torpor. And an imbalance of the concentration and the energy. And you can try to notice perhaps what is happening just before you fall asleep. So if you can start to bring the mindfulness so at first you'll fall asleep, you'll wake up and you'll reflect. But then as your mindfulness becomes more continuous, you'll start to notice when the energy starts to drop. And instead of letting it drop, you can make a slight shift to boost the energy or to boost the joy. Sometimes there's already joy present, but we're not really aware of it. Tuning in to the awakening factor of joy or the jhana factor of joy can bring energy into the system. So usually, but honestly, the sleepiness it's not a hindrance that I worry very much about. But I do think it's something that we have to develop some skill with. But it's not a harsh, horrible hindrance. But I certainly wouldn't confuse it with absorption. Absorption, the mind is bright. It's energetic. In fact, when I would come out of absorption, I would almost feel like I could solve all the energy needs of the world. Just plug me in. There's this sense of powerful, pure energy, as though we've tapped into something, not agitated at all, just pure flowing energy that has the power beyond anything that we normally would think of. So I can remember thinking, just if they could figure out how to tap into this, there would be no need for fossil fuels and for windmills and for all these things. It's just energy, because there's a tremendous energy that's available. I don't know, in this mind-body system that becomes available to us when we are not exhausted. And what exhausts us? Usually it's thinking. Usually it's the patterns of thought, the habits of restlessness that are connected with greed, hate, and delusion. Absolutely exhausting. So when you can abide in an absorption state where you're free of the hindrances and are not engaged in all those thoughts that are diverting the energy, the experience is one of profound but balanced energy. So if there's a feeling of falling asleep, I just would put that more in the category of the concentration and energy being not in balance, and it would not be an absorption.
Sure. Thank you, Shaila. We have a question from Facebook. Does ADHD affects one's ability to progress in jhana?
I have had a number of students that have had ADHD, some using medication, some not, some rather mild, some more severe. And I don't believe it makes it impossible, but I think it does make it more difficult and challenging. And but I don't think it's an incorrect practice for somebody with ADHD. What I generally do when I'm working with those students is really try to encourage patience and diligence and an attitude of mind that is completely free of judging. Because if they judge how they're meditating compared to somebody who's sitting next to them in a group meditation hall, then it can lead to disappointment, rather than realizing that the practice that they're doing is actually improving their concentration.
Sure.
So if there's comparing to somebody else and then expectation and ideas of that they want, some people come to a retreat with a condition like ADHD and want a cure, in a week-long retreat. And I've never seen that happen. I'm not saying that it can't, but I've never seen it happen. But I have seen patience and diligence growing. I've seen concentration growing. I've seen the ability to have a more calm, peaceful clarity increasing. I also, with ADHD meditators, I tend to want to do things in shorter doses. Like instead of sitting for an hour and a half, we might break it up much shorter and do activities or stand and sit or do a slight movement in between to just break things up, to learn to rest the mind and then refocus, to rest the mind and refocus. So there would be some slight different things that one can do. But remember, I'm not, my teaching is not about getting into these states of jhana. Some people do and some people don't. What matters to me is that somebody practice with right view and develop samadhi based upon virtue, and that their concentration deepen.
Sure. And I think, Shaila, I think that's really good that you bring that point out, because I remember being a young monk and sort of, having the same mentality of, I'm going to go into a monastery, I'm going to get this done. Planning everything out, going into a monastery and completely burning out. And and some of my other sort of students know this story where, I go into retreat and I'm fully in the retreat and no excuses, but then I burn myself out and then I relax and then you go into jhana and stay in jhana for 6 hours, 7 hours, and within a short span of about 2 weeks, right? When I was burning out, I couldn't even sit for, an hour, right? And that's so important, that sort of, and I love that you bring that out in your teachings.
Yeah, the right effort is one of the most important meditators' skills. Mm-hmm. And when we're engaged in wrong effort, it gives us a chance to see the kind of defilements that are behind that, the identification or the expectations. So it helps us to have insight into our patterns, and then we can see that the correction that happens in our effort, we can also see that then we're not triggering those same obstructions. So it sounds like, oh, right, effort. It's just about actually relaxing a little bit or giving more energy to it. But when we're out of balance because of some habitual conditioning, and so we can then resolve those. You get insight insight to the not necessarily the insight into anicca, dukkha, and anatta of vipassana practice, but you get a lot of insights into the way the mind and body work and the way our habits function by creating these conditions to support samadhi.
We have a lot of questions, Shaila, but I think you'll have to come back. So one last question before because I am aware that we have gone above our time, but one last question. What is the difference between samadhi and jhana?
Okay. So there are many kinds of samadhi. So I spoke a little bit about the samadhi with a fixed focus, the samadhi with on changing objects, momentary samadhi, khanika samadhi. There are other kinds of samadhi too. So samadhi is a pretty broad term that maybe we could describe it primarily as the unification and stillness of the mind. But there are specific states of samadhi that are called the four jhanas. And each one has certain characteristics where one enters into an absorption state where one is secluded from the senses, where the mind is not engaged in thinking. So they're very particular states that are within. We could think of samadhi as being more of the quality of the mind and an umbrella category, an umbrella description. And we might think of the jhanas as being a very specific states that each have particular characteristics.
Lovely. Can we take one more? Is that okay, Shaila?
It's okay with me.
Okay, if it's okay.
I think we're not gonna. I think you're right. We're gonna have to do this again because even in when I spoke with you before, there were many different things to talk about. So I thought, oh well, there's so many things. Let's start with an introduction to samadhi, and then maybe we can address the specifics of jhana or the errors around jhana or the relationship of jhana and insight in later conversations. But what's this question?
Well, so thank you, Shaila, for a great talk. Using anapanasati, breathing meditation, as a primary meditation to experience at least the first jhana, how many hours would you recommend putting into the practice on a given day? Also, in your opinion, what is the optimal way to break it up into several sessions? Also, best time to schedule it for would be great. So a lot of questions there.
But all very practical. The timing really depends upon the person and what your worldly responsibilities are. Of course, many people prefer to sit in the morning before they've before they've checked their email, before they've had conversations and been, drawn into various dramas in their communities and families. So the morning for many people is the freshest time, but not for everybody. Some people just wake up slowly and their strongest meditations are much later in the day. So, and some people prefer to sit a little bit in the morning and then a little bit in the evening so that they frame their day with and increase their meditation practice, not by having longer sittings, but by having an additional sitting. And some people prefer to then do that, but then say, oh, I can take a break in the middle of the day and sit for 20 minutes or a half an hour. And when you start doing that, the mindfulness gets much more continuous, even in the in-between periods, because you're remembering. And remember, the hardest thing about mindfulness is only to remember to be mindful. Now, in terms of jhana practice, I can't say how many hours one needs to meditate at home in order to access it. But I do think that I have not seen it happen. First of all, in my experience, most people need to train in it in a retreat context initially. And then once they know it, and their minds know it, and the skills, the path, the way is all very clear, then it's not so difficult to maintain in daily life. And I see people not only maintaining it in daily life, but also continuing to deepen. Like maybe in retreat, they would have only gotten as far as the first jhana, because there are lots of exercises I like people to do. I don't like them to rush through. I like them to develop skills and masteries at every level. So there's simply not time in a say a 10-day retreat, which is often what I'll teach. There's not time to get through very far, even if somebody has the aptitude, because I want them to go through all the exercises so that their minds are really know the skills. Anyway, so they might, but what I do see is that people who not only who have done the absorption in a retreat and then they continue at home, people practicing 2 hours or more are not only able to maintain, but are able to continue to develop and deepen the practice. People practicing much less than that are usually, it falls away. Usually the restlessness of life makes it to diminish it very quickly. So as busy lay people, it's not uncommon for people who have an aptitude for concentration to go into retreat, have a deep experience, have it linger for a little while after the retreat, while there's the momentum from the retreat and they're sitting a little bit more. And then when they settle back to maybe just 1 hour a day or even less, sometimes 45 minutes or a half an hour a day, they lose the access. Then they go back into retreat. And it has to warm up a little bit. You know, if you're only sitting that, most people have to warm up. So it takes a couple of days in retreat. If somebody's maintaining it, they just come into the retreat and they sit down and it's right there. So then we can go farther, faster. So it just depends upon conditions. That's not to say that there aren't a few rare people in the world who actually can do this very, very easily. But most people, first of all, the majority of people don't get into absorption, but everybody that I've worked with deepens their samadhi. And that's what's important. And then of those people who do get absorption, how long they maintain it depends a lot on how they practice at home. And again, if you're a lay person, you just have to know that you're juggling different things, and that has to be okay. You know, that has to be okay. So we keep practicing from time to time, and we have to accept that that's we get out of it what we put in, I guess you could say. Now, did I get all 3 parts of those?
I think you did. Well, if not, I'll hold it on for you for next time.
Okay.
Yes, and thank you, Shaila. I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to be in touch with you, and I hope that you come back to us, and possibly when Corona is over, we will be able to do a retreat in the UK, and so let's talk about that.
Okay, that would be great. That would be lovely.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shaila, for coming.
Thank you.
Sharing your views of
Thank
wisdom.
you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
For sharing your views of wisdom with us. It's been lovely, and it's been so easy to work with you and to sort of, coordinate all of this. And so I will be sending out a link with links of Shaila's, sort of what Shaila has shared with regards to her retreats. You can also find all those sign up registration details on the website, on Shaila's profile, on the Dhamma Center website, as well as on her website. Just search her name, she's everywhere. So so thank you very much, Shaila. Thank you all. I know for the Dhamma Center clan, it's been a long day, so you can take some rest now. We've had another big talk which happened before this. So it's been a long day. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shaila, and take care, and have a brilliant rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you, Shaila. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Shaila. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.